Imagine being handed a prison sentence based entirely on a mathematical equation that your employer knew was broken. For nearly 2 decades, one of the most trusted institutions in the United Kingdom used a flawed computer network to financially ruin its own people. This was not a simple administrative error or a brief technological glitch. It was a calculated campaign of institutional self-preservation that destroyed lives to protect a corporate image. The tragedy reveals exactly what happens when blind faith in technology collides with unchecked institutional power. In the late 1990s, the British Post Office sought to modernize its sprawling network of thousands of local branches. They partnered with the technology firm Fujitsu to roll out a centralized electronic accounting system known as Horizon. The goal was to replace paper ledgers with a streamlined digital interface that would track every stamp sold and every pension paid. It was billed as a triumph of efficiency that would bring a historic public service into the digital age. Almost immediately after the rollout, the people running these local branches, known as sub-postmasters, began noticing impossible discrepancies. The software would freeze, crash, or duplicate transactions, creating phantom financial shortfalls at the end of the trading day. A branch manager might close their doors with a perfectly balanced till, only to find the computer demanding thousands of pounds the next morning. The system was generating debts out of thin air, but the digital ledger was treated as absolute fact. The immediate fallout from these digital errors fell squarely on the shoulders of the local operators. Under their contracts, sub-postmasters were held personally liable for any financial losses reported by the branch. Faced with unexplained deficits, many used their own life savings to balance the books, terrified of losing their livelihoods. They poured personal funds into a corporate void, attempting to satisfy a machine that was fundamentally broken. The financial drain was immediate, but the psychological toll was just beginning. At the corporate level, the post office faced a critical juncture regarding how to handle these mounting anomalies. Acknowledging that their multi-million-pound IT system was defective would have been a catastrophic public relations failure. It would have jeopardized government contracts and exposed the executive board to severe financial liabilities. Instead of investigating the software flaws, the organization chose to protect the asset. They decided the technology was infallible, which meant the humans operating it had to be criminals. This decision birthed a highly effective strategy of systemic gaslighting. When panicked workers called the centralized helpline to report the vanishing funds, they were met with a rehearsed script. The operators were instructed to tell every single caller that they were the only person experiencing this problem. By isolating the sub-postmasters, the organization prevented them from realizing they were part of a massive operational failure. This deliberate isolation made the victims question their own competence, sanity, and honesty. The situation escalated because the post office possessed a rare and dangerous legal privilege. Unlike a standard corporation that must hand evidence of theft over to the police, the institution had the historical authority to act as its own private prosecutor. They could investigate, charge, and prosecute their own staff without any independent law enforcement oversight. This removed the crucial checks and balances that normally protect citizens from baseless criminal charges. The employer was simultaneously the victim, the investigator, and the prosecutor. Armed with this unchecked power, the organization launched an aggressive legal campaign against its workforce. Hundreds of innocent people were dragged into criminal courts, accused of theft, fraud, and false accounting. The sole evidence presented against them was the unverified data exported directly from the Horizon software. Juries and judges, assuming a prestigious national institution would not fabricate evidence, handed down severe convictions. Lives were systematically dismantled through bankruptcies, prison sentences, and shattered community reputations. Behind the scenes, the narrative of a flawless computer network was entirely fabricated. Internal documents from Fujitsu eventually revealed that the software was riddled with bugs, errors, and defects from its inception. More importantly, technical support staff had backdoor access to the local branch terminals. These technicians could alter branch accounts remotely, changing financial balances without the knowledge or consent of the local managers. The digital evidence used to imprison people was being quietly manipulated by the very vendor that built the system. The incentive to hide this remote access was driven by pure institutional survival. If defense attorneys had known that the data could be altered remotely, the entire foundation of the criminal prosecutions would have collapsed. The post office legal department systematically suppressed expert reports and internal audits that warned of the software's instability. They buried the truth deep within corporate silos, utilizing legal privilege to hide documents that proved the innocence of their employees. The intersection of corporate hubris and technological blind spots created an environment where evidence was manipulated to fit a predetermined narrative. Executives became trapped in a sunk cost fallacy, believing they had prosecuted too many people to suddenly admit the foundational evidence was flawed. Reversing course would mean admitting to one of the most extensive miscarriages of justice in modern history. The organizational culture demanded that the illusion of control be maintained at all costs, regardless of the collateral damage. The facade only began to crack when a small group of convicted workers started finding each other outside the corporate structure. Through sheer determination, they formed an advocacy group to compare their identical experiences of sudden shortfalls and identical helpline dismissals. This grassroots network slowly pierced the veil of isolation that the institution had so carefully constructed. They gathered data, shared their stories with investigative journalists, and began the agonizingly slow process of building a collective legal challenge. The battle culminated in a massive civil litigation effort that forced the institution to finally open its technical archives. During these high court proceedings, independent technology experts were granted access to the underlying code and error logs. The resulting analysis dismantled the myth of the system's reliability, exposing thousands of recorded glitches that caused the exact financial discrepancies the workers had reported. The court found that the software was not remotely robust, and that the institutional defense was fundamentally dishonest. This judicial ruling triggered a seismic shift in how the legal system views computer-generated evidence. For decades, courts operated on the presumption that computers are inherently reliable unless proven otherwise. The exposure of this scandal demonstrated how dangerous that legal presumption can be when a corporation controls all access to the underlying data. It forced a re-evaluation of digital forensics, proving that lines of code are just as susceptible to human error and manipulation as a paper ledger. The fallout exposed a catastrophic failure of government oversight and regulatory action. The post office is entirely owned by the government, yet the ministers responsible for its supervision repeatedly accepted the board's assurances without question. Bureaucratic distance allowed officials to dismiss the growing pile of complaints as minor operational disputes rather than a severe human rights violation. The governance structure was designed to protect shareholder value, which in this case was the state itself, rather than ensuring ethical operations. This lack of oversight highlights the psychological comfort of bureaucratic inertia. Middle managers and executives relied on the diffusion of responsibility, where no single person felt accountable for the destruction of a worker's life. The automated nature of the reports provided a psychological shield for the prosecutors and investigators. They were simply following the data, trusting the machine over the desperate pleas of the human beings standing in front of them. It was the ultimate weaponization of administrative process. The long-term societal consequences of this event extend far beyond the immediate financial compensation eventually ordered by the courts. It fundamentally fractured public trust in institutional integrity and the adoption of centralized digital systems. When a beloved national entity is proven to have prioritized a software contract over human freedom, it sets a chilling precedent. It serves as a stark warning about the unchecked deployment of enterprise software in administrative justice systems worldwide. Unwinding the damage has proven to be a slow and agonizing procedural nightmare. Overturning the criminal convictions requires navigating a complex appeals process, forcing victims to fight the very legal system that wrongfully imprisoned them. Many of those accused passed away before ever seeing their names cleared or receiving a formal apology. The machinery of justice, which moved so swiftly to convict based on flawed data, has moved at a glacial pace to correct its own catastrophic errors. The anatomy of this disaster reveals the profound dangers of insulated corporate governance. It proves that when an organization structurally insulates itself from criticism and treats user feedback as a threat, it guarantees its own eventual collapse. The executives failed to realize that the most valuable data they possessed was not the output of their expensive software, but the consistent, desperate warnings from their frontline operators. Ignoring those warnings transformed a manageable technical glitch into a historic scandal. As modern corporations rapidly integrate artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms into their management structures, the lessons of this era become increasingly urgent. If a basic accounting program could be used to gaslight hundreds of people and subvert the justice system, the potential for abuse with opaque self-learning algorithms is exponentially higher. Organizations must implement rigorous, independent auditing mechanisms that prioritize human oversight over automated authority. The blind acceptance of digital outputs is a vulnerability that no society can afford. Ultimately, the tragedy was never really about a failing computer network. It was about the human choices made by executives who decided that protecting a corporate narrative was worth destroying innocent lives. It forces us to ask a critical question about the institutions we trust daily. When the data on a screen contradicts the reality of the physical world, do our systems possess the humility to question the machine, or will they always choose to sacrifice the human? Because understanding why it happened is the best way to recognize it happening again. If you enjoy breaking down the incentives, decisions, and systems behind corporate scandals, not just the headlines, subscribe for new investigations every week, because understanding why it happened is the best way to recognize it happening again.